Hi, it's Jared O'D here, Director of Training for Dynamis, and welcome back to part three of my series of talks about breakaway skills and how we have quite a unique and individual approach to breakaway skills at Dynamis. Now, in part one, I introduced some of the context and the legal background and so on, the research background for why we started looking at our methodology. In part two, I started to talk about some very common sports psychology ideas in regards to how stress impacts on performance in general, how survival stress impacts on motor skill performance, quite specifically, gross motor skills. And then I started to talk about the reaction time and the stimulus response model, where looking at the stimulus and identifying the stimulus was one critical factor, because what we found was that most training programs were ignoring the key stimulus that they needed to be focused on, which is impact and kinetic type assaults, not grabbing type assaults. So I'm going to start there today and start working on that problem. You see, one of the things that they have found in sports science is that how do you improve reaction time? Well, you work on advanced information. You work on identifying what are called pre-cues, and that dramatically speeds up reaction time. So we described reaction time last week as in the last talk as identifying the stimulus, then choosing an appropriate response and deploying the appropriate response. So some of the research has focused on improving that stimulus identification. And the reason you're looking at this tennis photograph here is that the difference between novice tennis players and veteran tennis players was that in one experiment that they carried out, it was that the experienced veteran tennis players could tell just from watching the video of the first part of somebody's serve, they could tell where the ball was going to end up with a far greater degree of accuracy than the novice tennis players could. So they showed them just the beginning of another player's serve, and they asked them where the ball was going to land. And that advanced stimulus identification skill that they'd built up was able to drastically improve their reactions and their appropriateness of their reactions to the cues that they were seeing. And this is hugely important when we take these novices into our breakaway skills training programs, and we often focus, or at least some training packages often focus on the end product of the assault. The hair grab, which is already completed, or the wrist grab, which is already completed, or the body grab, which is already completed. Now, in contrast to that, on our Dynamis training programs, we spend an awful lot of time focusing on what we call the pre-cues, the beginning of a large body grab, the beginning of a hair grab, and we train the staff to see the attack coming sooner, and that really helps them to improve their reaction time. Now, one other issue that we came across in our research on the sports science was that what you want is the compatibility of the stimulus and the most natural response to be very close. So this idea of stimulus response compatibility refers to the naturalness of the connection between the stimulus and the desired response. So for example, we give this example on our courses. When you're steering a car, it's really good stimulus response compatibility, because when you see a left turn coming up, you want to turn the wheel to the left, and that is a proper response to a left turn. On the other hand, if we put you at the back of a boat with an outboard motor on it, then if you want to turn the boat to the left, if the stimulus requires you to turn the boat to the left, it can take a little bit of time for the person to learn that they need to push the lever to the right hand side to get the on the outboard motor, for example, to get the boat to turn to the left. So that would not be such a great stimulus response compatibility. Now, what we're really talking about in terms of breakaway skill here is that if when something really quickly flies at my head and my hands want to shoot up in front of my face and push away that nasty thing that's coming at me, in whatever way that my body naturally wants to do that, then that has a great stimulus response compatibility. If, on the other hand, I get a trainer standing in front of me and he wants me to do an X block, or he wants me to do a certain kind of parry to that stimulus, then I'm going to have to, unlearn, and it'll create interference, and it'll therefore slow down my response time. So this idea of compatibility is very, very interesting. And what I just mentioned to you was this idea that my hands will fly up in front of my face and try to protect myself. Um, so what we found in our research was that the body will fire off patterns of behavior which are spatially oriented, and they're completely automatic. And from time to time, we call this instinctive protection. And one of the scientists who looked at this, his name was Graziano, and he talked about defensive gestures when he studied primates. And he said, look, these movements that are completely automatic in nature, they included a squint and a facial grimace, a turning of the head away from the side of the sensory receptive field that's being stimulated, a rapid movement of the hand to an upper lateral location as if blocking that object, and a turning outward of the palm. And interestingly, he even states that if you look at one of the studies of Michelangelo's fall and expulsion from Eden, that picture on your screen right now, he says if you see the study in human nature here, that's exactly what Adam in that picture is doing. And in fact, in our studies, what we've also found is that the compressing and almost fetal position that Eve is doing in that picture is another type of totally instinctive protection, which is common across the human species. So then when you look at real footage, real pictures of confrontations and security staff trying to control this man at a football match, for example, you see that outward turn palm, that extension in the body, the blinking, the turning of the face away from the stimulus, and so on. And this really was where our methodology started to take shape in terms of looking at how we can piggyback really on natural instinctive behavior in the trainees that were coming to us, and using it to speed up their responses and make them more appropriate. Now, there's been a body of work out there for many years about the flinch response, and that's really what we're talking about. There's plenty of research, and there's even some tactical programs out there that you can study that will teach you how to incorporate the startle reflex into your training. And certainly in our practice, we found it to be incredibly useful to quickly enable people to survive a sudden assault of any nature that's directed towards them. Is if we can help them to link their natural instinctive behavior to the types of assaults that we're looking at. So we try to capitalize on what the learner can already do. That makes our training quick and easy to assimilate. And really that crosses age, gender, physical condition, because we're using natural motions and really everyday skills that are not totally novel to our learners. And they're completely low maintenance. So every human being, when they experience pain or some other kind of noxious stimulus, will pull away with the hand or the part of the body that's been injured or stimulated, and they'll actually push away with the other side of their body. So these kind of pull and push motions that we've incorporated as compressed and extended frames in our dynamics training are very low maintenance skills. They're wired in at the most basic level, and as you can see in the quote on the screen here, they are uniform across the human species regardless of age and training. So keeping it simple is really, really important. We've talked about gross motor skills, we've talked about the startle reflex phenomenon, and so really we don't want to start introducing complexity into the movements that we want people to reproduce and perform. The complexity really, and I think this is what's missing in many of the programs, is in designing a training program that actually helps people to connect to their instinctive behavior and then helps them to refine it. That the complexity is in the design of the training, but it is not in the experience of the training for the learner. There are huge reasons for keeping things simple in terms of movement. It basically creates faster response times and increases in the appropriateness of the movements as well, if we just keep things simple. In terms of the number of techniques or tactics that one might want to teach a learner of breakaway skills, there is really good argument for keeping the number of desired responses to the smallest number possible. And as you've already seen, I've talked about extended type behavior and then compressed or flexion type behavior. And really, that's pretty much what we work on with our learners. We have quite a complex training methodology in the background, but when you look at our learners, they are really just responding with one of two different motor programs. And what we believe then is that very few of our learners will experience logjam, where they get confused between what the correct response to use might be. And they're just learning universally usable motions and postures. What we're really looking to do is to make our learners skillful. And we rely on Guthrie's definition of skill from 1952, which says any good skill will have maximum certainty of goal achievement, it will involve minimum energy expenditure and minimum movement time. And really, what's better than those incredibly quick, incredibly reliable reflexive motions and instinctive protection of the body? So that's a real key. That's the real secret sauce that makes Dynamis breakaway skills work. What I'll do when we come back to part 4, the final part of this series, is I'll speak more about some of the more intrinsic behavior and person-centered nature of the training that we deliver. We have to think about the person. And also, when we talk about training design, I'll explain a little bit about what we call training fidelity in the training environment. So that's today's talk. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you'll stick with us for part 4, which is coming very shortly.